The Galactic Empire had no idea what they were truly facing in their pursuit of Elara. They saw only a woman dressed in the robes of a diplomat, someone who spoke in calm, measured tones, and carried an air of peace, as if she had nothing to fear from the vast war machine that was the Empire. They thought her naive, that she believed her planet could remain untouched as they expanded their territory across the stars. But they were wrong. The Empire never understood the quiet power that humbly sat within her. They underestimated the threat, because she did not wear the armor of a soldier, nor carry the weapons of war. They knew nothing of the ancient darkness she harbored within herself, nor of the legends that whispered across the galaxy. Her name carried weight in places they had long since forgotten. The fleet had been assembled quickly, several destroyers and countless smaller vessels, each filled with soldiers eager to crush any resistance with the efficiency of a blade cutting through paper. They thought their mission would be swift, simple, and without incident. The Empire had crushed rebellions far greater than anything Elara's world could offer, yet here they were sending their forces to seize a woman who they thought was no more than a political nuisance. They sent their most seasoned generals to oversee her capture, ensuring that this one would not slip away unnoticed. The captain of the fleet had been briefed thoroughly on Elara's history. Her meetings with several other factions were noted, but the general consensus was that she posed no real threat. She was a figurehead, a pawn at best. But Elara was not the woman they thought her to be. She had spent centuries navigating the corridors of power with a subtlety few could ever understand. She knew the language of diplomacy better than anyone, but beneath that smooth exterior lay the heart of something far more terrifying. In the ancient corners of the galaxy, the stories of Baba Yaga were spoken in hushed tones. Some said she was a witch, some said she was a god, some said she was the embodiment of death itself. Few knew the truth, few even cared to remember the old ways and the power that had once shaped the universe. Elara knew of these tales. She had lived through them as the galaxy turned and ages passed. She wore the guise of a diplomat because it was a role that allowed her to exist in plain sight while hiding the raw, untamable force within her. Her purpose now was far removed from the chaos and destruction she had once sown across the stars. She had become the keeper of balance, a force that intervened only when the fabric of the universe itself was in jeopardy. Yet the Empire had failed to recognize this. They thought her harmless, and now they were preparing to make their move. The captain of the fleet paced back and forth in his command center as his ship entered orbit around her world. His mind was already working out the plans for her capture, how she would be brought aboard, for questioning how they would extract every secret she knew. He was confident the forces he commanded were more than capable of dealing with the woman. Within hours, she would be under their control, and the Empire would no longer have to worry about her growing influence. But little did he know that the very moment he had ordered the assault was the moment that the true battle had already begun. He would soon realize the mistake of thinking Elara was merely a diplomat, and not the thing of nightmares that had haunted the galaxy since time immemorial. Elara sat in the quiet of her chambers, her fingers tracing the edge of an old wooden table. The soft hum of the stars beyond her window was a reminder that time never stopped. It always moved forward, like a river carving its way through the landscape of the galaxy. She had lived through centuries of conflict and peace, seen countless empires rise and fall, but now she found herself caught between two worlds, one that sought to maintain the delicate peace she had worked so hard to establish, and another that would soon learn the cost of disturbing that peace. She had known the Empire would come eventually. Their arrogance was always their undoing. They saw the galaxy as their playground, their territory to be expanded and dominated without regard for the fragile balance that kept everything from collapsing into chaos. They had underestimated her. For the last time, she had played the game of diplomacy because it suited her purpose. It allowed her to remain unnoticed, to move through the stars as a simple negotiator. But the time for subtlety had passed. The time for negotiation was over now. It was time for them to understand the true meaning of power. Elara closed her eyes for a moment, letting the memories wash over her, the whispers of ancient gods and long-forgotten forces, the powers that had shaped the universe long before the first humans stepped foot on this planet. Before the Empire ever existed, she had been there in the shadows, watching and waiting. Her name had been lost to history for a reason, But the truth was far more terrifying than any myth. She was the embodiment of something older than the stars themselves, a force that had once brought entire civilizations to their knees. The stars outside her window seemed to flicker in acknowledgement of her thoughts. She could feel the weight of the Empire's fleet, drawing nearer their arrogance like a storm on the horizon. She could almost hear the thunder of their approach, each ship a dark shadow growing larger as it neared her world. They thought they were in control. They thought they had the upper hand. But they did not understand the nature of the power they were about to face. Her thoughts shifted to the fleet's captain, a man who was likely preparing to give orders. As if the victory was assured, he had no idea what he was walking into. He was nothing more than a puppet following orders from a higher power that would soon regret its decision to send him after her. She could feel the connection growing between them, like a string being pulled taut in the air. She knew he was coming. She knew the moment he had set his course to her world. It was only a matter of time before the storm hit. And when it did, the galaxy would remember the name Baba Yaga once more. Ilara stood from her seat, her movements graceful and fluid, as if she were one with the universe itself. She reached for a small medallion around her neck. It had been a gift from a time long past, a token of the world she had left behind, the world that had birthed her, the world of shadows and fire. She had not called upon its power in ages, but now it stirred within her like an old flame waiting to ignite. She felt the familiar hum of energy coursing through her veins, the air around her crackling with the potential of what was to come. The captain's fleet would soon arrive, and when they did, Ilara would be ready. She would not allow the Empire to destroy what she had worked so hard to protect. She would not allow them to rewrite the balance of the galaxy as they saw fit. She was no longer a mere diplomat. She was something more, something ancient, and something that could not be contained, and soon the galaxy would learn that lesson in a way they would never forget. The Empire's fleet broke through the atmosphere and into the orbit of Ilara's home planet. Their ships glided through the stars with the cold precision of a machine that had been built for conquest. Not a single thought was spared for the delicate world below, or the life that had flourished there in peace for so long. The fleet's captains stood at the helm of the flagship, watching as the planet grew larger on the view screen. He could almost taste victory, as if it were already in his grasp. The fleet was massive, each ship designed for overwhelming firepower. The soldiers aboard were eager for the mission to begin, and the captain was confident the entire operation would be over quickly without resistance. They had underestimated the quiet power that lived within this small world, this seemingly peaceful woman. They believed they were simply eliminating a nuisance, when in reality they were walking into a storm they would not survive. The captain gave the order to deploy troops. The bay doors of the flagship opened with a deep rumble, releasing the soldiers in a controlled wave. As they descended toward the surface, each squadron of elite troops, ready for anything they encountered, the soldiers disembarked as if it were any other mission, unaware that the ground beneath their feet was already shifting. Ilara stood at the edge of the compound, her eyes watching the vastness of the fleet. As it descended from the heavens, she could feel the pressure of the fleet in orbit, the weight of their expectation as they prepared to descend onto the surface like a pack of wolves, circling a single rabbit. She felt a flicker of amusement. She had long ago learned to navigate the complexities of war. She had seen empires burn and rise from the ashes. But this time it was different. This time she was not going to let them sweep over her world without a fight. As the first wave of soldiers landed on the planet's surface, the ground trembled under their feet, their boots touching the earth with all the authority they believed they had earned. The Empire had forgotten that this world was hers to protect. They had forgotten that she was no mere diplomat, that she was a being far older and far more dangerous than they could ever comprehend. The soldiers advanced on the compound, their weapons drawn and their eyes trained on the objective. They saw only a peaceful building in front of them, with no sign of resistance. It looked like any other embassy they had seen before. They thought this would be a simple mission. They would enter, seize her, and leave. But the moment they set foot on the soil of her world, the air around them seemed to thicken. The temperature began to drop, as if they had crossed into a place where time itself no longer worked. The energy in the air was palpable. It was a silent warning that they were not welcome here. The first soldier took a step forward, his hand trembling. As he reached out for the door of the compound, the moment his fingers brushed the surface of the door, a shockwave of energy exploded outward from Ilara's position. The soldier was thrown back into the air with terrifying speed, slamming into a nearby wall. As the rest of the troops froze in place, the calmness of the atmosphere around them shattered. The reality they had built began to crack and fracture. In that moment, the captain felt it too, the subtle shift in the galaxy, the pulse of ancient energy that began to resonate from deep within the compound. His heart skipped a beat as he realized the grave mistake they had made. They had not just landed on a peaceful planet, they had walked into the very heart of something they should have never challenged. The air around the compound buzzed with a strange energy. The very fabric of reality seemed to ripple with the tension of an incoming storm as Ilara prepared to make her move. The captain's mind raced as the soldiers were sent flying into the air, their weapons, now useless, their commands, met with nothing but confusion and fear. He could feel it, the shift in the air, a disturbance so subtle yet so profound that it made his skin crawl for a moment. Everything stood still, the world seemed to hold its breath. And then there she was, Ilara, standing calmly in the midst of the chaos, her figure unscathed by the explosion of energy, her eyes glowing faintly like the quiet gleam of distant stars. She was no longer the diplomatic figure they thought her to be. She was something else entirely, something ancient and terrifying. The captain's voice cracked as he tried to regain control of the situation, his commands coming out sharp and panicked. He demanded his soldiers regroup and move forward, but the men hesitated. They could feel the oppressive weight of her presence bearing down on them. They had come here expecting a simple mission, but what they faced was far beyond their understanding. The captain had known of legends, the tales whispered in the dark corners of the galaxy, but he had never truly believed in them. He had dismissed them as the fantasies of old races who had long since passed away. But now, as he stared at Ilara, his doubts vanished. He realized with a sinking feeling that the woman standing before him was the very thing that had haunted his nightmares. Ilara's voice broke through the tension like a knife cutting through the silence. It was soft at first, almost a whisper, but there was an undeniable weight to it, a power that vibrated with the very pulse of the universe itself. She spoke not of threats or demands, but of truths long forgotten. Her words were like a cold wind sweeping through a forgotten battlefield. They echoed with the weight of countless centuries of existence. She did not need to raise her voice to command the attention of the Empire's forces. They were already captivated by her presence. "Do you know who I am?" she asked, her tone laced with a quiet finality. "Do you know the consequences of your actions? Do you understand what you have just disturbed?" The captain tried to speak, but no words came, his throat tight with fear, his mind struggling to process the impossibility of the situation. He had thought her nothing more than a minor annoyance, something easily dealt with, but now he realized that he was standing face to face with the Baba Yaga, the legendary force of destruction and balance, a being who had shaped the fate of galaxies, a being who had once torn civilizations apart with a single thought. As Ilara continued to speak, her words seemed to stretch out into the very fabric of reality itself. The soldiers around the captain began to shift uncomfortably, their eyes wide with fear. They could feel it now. The power that emanated from her was overwhelming. They were no longer dealing with a woman. They were facing something beyond the bounds of comprehension, something older than time itself. "Ilara is not my name anymore," she continued, her gaze never leaving the captain. "You will not call me that again. It is gone, just as the world I once knew is gone. What you face now is Baba Yaga, the protector of balance, the harbinger of reckoning." With a wave of her hand, the soldiers in front of her were thrown aside like ragdolls, their bodies crashing into the walls with brutal force. Yet she showed no sign of exertion. Her calmness only deepened the terror around her. The captain could not breathe. He could not think. Everything in his mind screamed for him to retreat, but his body refused to obey. He could feel the overwhelming force pushing him down, his knees threatening to buckle beneath him. The reality of the situation set in like a crushing weight, his confidence shattered into 1,000 pieces. There was no way out, no way to fight back. The Empire's might had become insignificant in the face of something that existed long before their warships had ever been built. Ilara was not a diplomat, she was not a simple negotiator. She was an ancient power, a force that would either accept or destroy them all depending on how they chose to face her. But there was no turning back now. The trap had been set, and the Empire was already falling into it. The captain's knees buckled, and he fell to the floor as the weight of the situation crashed down on him like a falling star. His soldiers lay motionless around him, some still trying to move, but their limbs disobedient, their minds trapped in the grip of Ilara's power. The once confident soldiers who had thought they could take her easily now cowered before the force that radiated from her. It was as if the very air had grown heavy with ancient gravity, pulling them deeper into a place where they could not escape. The stars above them seemed to flicker uncertainly, as if they too were holding their breath in the presence of this woman who stood at the center of their fate. Ilara did not move. Her gaze was steady, unwavering, her hands at her sides relaxed, but poised with a quiet power that made the universe feel smaller with every passing second. Her eyes glowed faintly as the captain fought to catch his breath, trying to muster the courage to speak, but his voice failed him. Instead, he could only stare at her with a mixture of terror and awe. The woman who had been a mere diplomat had become something else entirely, something beyond their understanding, something more terrifying than the greatest fleets the Empire could command. "I warned you," Ilara's voice cut through the stillness like a blade, smooth and cold. "I told you that peace had a price, and now you are paying it." Her words held no malice. They were not a threat, they were a statement, a simple acknowledgement of the universe's cruel balance that had now been disturbed. Her gaze shifted toward the soldiers who had been thrown aside, their bodies twitching with the lingering effects of her power. She raised a hand, and the air around them shifted again. The ground rumbled as if something ancient was awakening beneath the surface of the planet. Without moving her finger, the soldiers were lifted from the ground and suspended in mid-air, their bodies now floating above the ground, their faces frozen in terror as their limbs hung limply. "Do you understand now?" Ilara continued. "You thought you could crush what you did not understand, but you have only awakened what you feared." The captain could do nothing but watch as his soldiers were slowly pulled back toward her like moths to a flame. He could feel the terror spreading among the rest of the fleet, as if a dark cloud had descended upon them, blocking out the stars above. He realized then that Ilara was not just a force of destruction, she was a force of creation, too, her power reshaping reality itself with every motion. Her ability to bend the fabric of space and time felt limitless. And as his soldiers hung before her, he saw the realization flicker across their faces. They were not the first to fall before her, and they would not be the last. The captain tried to speak again, but his voice failed him once more. His mind screamed for him to issue orders, to call for reinforcements, to find a way out, but his body betrayed him. All he could do was watch as Ilara's power twisted the air around him, her fingers now tracing invisible lines in the air, as if drawing out a plan only she could see. With a single gesture, the soldiers would drop to the ground, as if their bodies were nothing more than broken dolls, their movements sluggish and slow, as they struggled to stand, their terror palpable. Even in their weakened state, they had been broken not physically but mentally. Something deeper had been shattered within them, their minds now crippled by the overwhelming force of her presence. Ilara's gaze flicked back to the captain once more, and for the first time she spoke directly to him, her voice low and cold. "You are not the first to try to conquer the stars in my name," she said, "and you will not be the last, but I will not allow you to disrupt the balance of this galaxy." The captain's mind reeled, the truth of her words sinking in with every passing moment. He had come to subdue a diplomat, but now he was facing something far older and far more dangerous than any threat he had ever known. The power of the universe itself was on her side, and the Empire was powerless before it. The captain's heart pounded in his chest, his mind a swirl of disbelief and fear as he tried to make sense of the impossible situation unfolding before him. He had entered this mission with a sense of invincibility, believing his fleet would crush this insignificant diplomat and take control of the galaxy's fate with a single strike. But now he stood before something that defied all reason, something that had existed long before his empire and would remain long after it was gone. Elara did not move. She simply watched him with those piercing eyes, her presence a palpable force that made it feel as if the universe itself had folded around her. Every step of hers had rippled through the very fabric of reality. He could feel the weight of her gaze, as if it was too much to bear, as if she was weighing his soul with a single glance. It wasn't just the terror of her power, it was the overwhelming certainty that this was not a battle he could win. The soldiers who had once been confident and proud now lay crumpled around her like broken toys, their minds shattered by the sheer force of her being. They were beyond saving, beyond repair. "Do you understand now, Captain?" Elara's voice broke the silence like a low rumble from a distant storm. Her tone was calm, but there was an edge to it, something that made his blood run cold. "You thought you could wage war on the universe with your ships and your guns, but you do not understand what you are up against. You do not understand who I am." The captain struggled to regain control of himself, his body trembling, but his mind sharp with a desperate need to survive. He had never faced anything like this before. No amount of strategy or firepower could have prepared him for the sheer scale of power that Elara wielded. She was not just a diplomat, she was not even human in the way he understood humanity. She was an agent of balance, a force that could not be contained or controlled. She was a storm that would tear apart empires without a second thought. "Please," the captain croaked, his voice barely a whisper. "We didn't know, we didn't understand, we were just following orders." Elara's eyes narrowed slightly, and for the first time there was a hint of something else behind her gaze, something almost sad, as if she had seen this all before and knew how it would end. "You think it matters that you didn't know?" she asked, her voice soft, but still carrying an unshakable weight. "Do you think ignorance can save you from the consequences of your actions?" The captain opened his mouth to speak again, but no words came out. The silence between them grew thicker and more suffocating with each passing moment, the weight of her power pressing down on him until he felt as though he could no longer breathe. Elara stepped forward slowly, and with each step, the air seemed to vibrate, the ground beneath them crackling, as if the planet itself was alive and reacting to her presence. "I have seen this before," Elara continued, her voice now tinged with something ancient, something sorrowful. "I have seen empires like yours rise and fall. I have watched as those who believe themselves untouchable are destroyed by their own arrogance." She paused for a moment, letting the words hang in the air before continuing. "But I do not take pleasure in destruction. I do not seek war." The captain's mind struggled to keep up with her words, her presence overwhelming him. At every turn, he could feel the energy swirling around them. It was like standing in the heart of a dying star. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. "I have a choice to make," Elara said, her voice growing colder now. "I could destroy you all right now and erase every trace of your empire from the galaxy, but that would only create another cycle of destruction, another round of violence that would never end." The captain finally found his voice, the words escaping him in a breathless rush. "Please don't do it, we don't deserve this." Elara stared at him, her eyes narrowing as she measured his sincerity, but she said nothing for a long while. The galaxy seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her response. And in that silence, the captain understood the depth of her power and the weight of his own failure. The Empire had underestimated her, not because she was weak, but because they had never understood the forces they were up against, and now it was too late to turn back. The silence between them stretched on, and in that silence, the captain could feel his own heart thundering in his chest, his mind reeling, trying to process the impossible reality that had unfolded before him. He had come to conquer and subdue, but now he was reduced to a desperate, pleading creature who could only beg for mercy from the very force he had once believed to be a myth, a legend, not even real in the way that mattered. Elara stood before him with a presence that seemed to bend the very fabric of time itself. She was not just a woman, she was a symbol of something much older, something beyond the comprehension of any mortal being. She had given him the chance to understand. But now he was grasping at straws, trying to find a way to save himself, his fleet, his soldiers, and his empire from the inevitable reckoning. Elara's gaze softened ever so slightly, but it was enough for the captain to feel a flicker of hope that perhaps the end would not be as brutal as he had imagined. But that hope was fleeting. because as soon as it appeared, the weight of her next words slammed into him with the force of 1,000 starships crashing down upon his consciousness. "You ask for mercy, Captain, but mercy is not mine to give," Elara said, her voice calm, but carrying an immense gravity that made the captain shudder in the very marrow of his bones. "You are a small part of a much larger problem, a problem that has existed long before you, and will continue long after you are gone. Your empire is not an isolated case. It is only one of many that has sought to break the balance I guard." Her words were like a cold wind cutting through the captain's soul, and he found himself unable to speak, his own voice constricted by the overwhelming power of her presence as she continued to speak. "I do not destroy out of malice," Elara said, her eyes narrowing slightly, "but I do not allow the universe to be torn apart by the greed of those who seek to conquer it in their blind arrogance. You do not understand the cost of your actions. The price you have set in motion cannot be undone, and now it is time for you to face the consequences of your choices." The captain's mind screamed for a way out, but there was none. His fleet was powerless in her presence. His soldiers were already broken, and the empire he had pledged loyalty to was crumbling before him. And he could feel it deep in his bones that there was no escape from the fate that awaited them, no matter how hard he tried to deny it. The inevitable truth was staring him in the face, and there was no running from it. "I could destroy you all right now," Elara continued, her voice as cold and merciless as the void of space itself. "But that would only create another cycle of violence, another empire that would rise and fall with the same futile hopes of conquering the stars." She paused as her eyes locked onto his. "No, I will not do that. I will not allow the universe to descend into endless conflict because of one empire's mistake." The captain felt his legs begin to shake, his mind a maelstrom of panic and disbelief as the weight of Elara's words sank in. She was not here to destroy them outright, but to teach them something far worse than mere annihilation. She was here to show them the consequences of their actions and to make them understand the gravity of the balance they had upset. "You will leave this place, Captain," Elara said, her voice softer now, but still carrying the weight of inevitability. "You will return to your empire, and you will carry with you a warning not just for your leaders, but for every being who seeks to conquer what they do not understand. Tell them that there are powers in this galaxy far beyond their reach, and that they will answer for every wrong they commit." The captain opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. His breath caught in his throat as he realized there was nothing left to say, nothing left to do. The game was over for him and his empire. The reckoning had come, and he had no choice but to face the consequences of his choices. The captain stood frozen, unable to move as Elara's words sank deep into his very being. He had expected death or destruction, something quick and final. But what she offered him was far worse. It was not the swift end he had imagined, but a life weighed down by the knowledge of his failure, the weight of his actions now branded into his soul with an intensity that left him hollowed out. A part of him longed for the release of annihilation, anything to escape the shame of what he had unleashed. Elara's eyes remained locked onto his face, her expression unreadable. She had made her decision, and there was no mercy left for him. But there was no need for her to be cruel. Her power was not one of cruelty, it was one of balance and order. And in that order the captain had found himself lost. His eyes flicked to the remnants of his soldiers, scattered on the ground, their bodies broken, and still his once proud warriors, reduced to nothing more than discarded shells, their minds fractured by the overwhelming force of Elara's presence. "You will not escape this," Elara said, her voice now soft and almost sad, as if she too felt the weight of the moment. "You may return to your empire, but the damage is already done. The balance has already been tipped, and nothing will ever be the same again." The captain's hands trembled as he finally found the courage to speak, his voice a hoarse rasp born of fear and desperation. "Please," he whispered, "I didn't mean for this to happen. We were just following orders. We didn't know, we didn't understand." Elara sighed as if she had heard this plea countless times before, and she probably had. "Ignorance is not an excuse," she said, her words carrying a timeless weight. "The empire you serve has crossed a line that should never have been crossed, and now the consequences of that will ripple out through the galaxy the way the stars shift when a comet passes by." She looked around at the broken soldiers and the wreckage of what was once a thriving, peaceful land, and continued, "Every choice you make, every action you take has repercussions. Even the smallest ripple creates waves that cannot always be contained." The captain lowered his head as the reality of her words flooded him. He wanted to scream, he wanted to run, but he knew there was no escaping this. The power she wielded was not something that could be outrun or fought against. It was a force of nature, an elemental presence that had been here long before empires had learned to rise and fall, and would remain long after they were nothing more than dust and memory. "I failed them," he said, barely audible, his voice thick with regret. Ilara stepped closer, her presence filling the air like the weight of the sky pressing down on him. "No," she said, her tone firm, "you are not the one who has failed them. You have simply been a part of a much larger story, a story written long before you took your first breath. You were a pawn in a game you didn't even realize you were playing, but you still have a choice now." The captain looked up at her, confused, unsure of what she meant. "A choice," he whispered. "What choice could I possibly have?" "The choice to turn away from the path you've walked so far," she said quietly. "The choice to leave behind the lies you have been fed and see the galaxy for what it truly is, a fragile, living thing full of infinite possibilities and infinite dangers. If you return to your empire, you will be nothing but a tool in the hands of those who seek to control. But if you walk away now, you can choose something else. You can choose a path that might allow you to undo some of the damage done, or you can choose to walk away completely and allow yourself to grow beyond the chains that have bound you." The captain's heart pounded as the weight of her words crashed into him. It was as if a door had been opened in his mind, and for the first time he could see the vastness of the universe, the infinite possibilities laid out before him, choices he had never considered before. He felt the weight of the power Ilara held within her, and for the first time in his life, he understood the true meaning of freedom. "You're telling me to leave it all behind," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Ilara nodded slowly. "It's not an easy path, but it's the only one left to you. The empire you once served will fall. It is already doomed by its own greed and arrogance, but you don't have to go down with it." For the first time, the captain truly understood what Ilara was offering him. It wasn't just his life she was offering, it was a chance to find redemption, a chance to walk away from the endless cycle of violence and destruction that had consumed his world, and now he had to decide whether he would take it. The captain stood at the crossroads of his existence, his heart a storm of conflicting emotions. As Ilara's words echoed in his mind, he felt the enormity of the decision before him and the weight of every choice that had led him here. The remnants of his once proud fleet lay scattered around him, the soldiers who had been his brothers in arms, reduced to nothing more than broken bodies, their lives torn apart by the forces he had so blindly followed, and for what the captain had always believed in the strength of the empire. But now he understood that strength was an illusion built on lies and manipulation. He had been nothing more than a cog in a machine, a pawn in a game far older and far more dangerous than he could ever imagine. Ilara's eyes were still fixed on him. She stood there like a force of nature, unyielding and unwavering, her power palpable in the very air around them. And yet her presence was not one of wrath, but one of quiet resolve, as if she had seen this moment play out countless times before, and had learned that only those who could see beyond the illusion of power and control would ever truly understand the universe she had spent eons protecting. "You have a choice now, Captain," Ilara said, her voice gentle but unyielding. "You can walk away from this life and seek a path of redemption, or you can return to the Empire and continue to serve the forces that will only lead it to its inevitable collapse. But know this, if you choose to return, you will be complicit in its destruction. There is no going back." The captain's mind raced as he thought about the empire. He had once served the power, he had been raised to believe in it, had been all-encompassing, a force that spread across the stars and crushed all in its path. But now he saw it for what it truly was, a dying beast, gasping for breath as it was suffocated by its own arrogance, its own insatiable greed for control. He thought of the families of the soldiers who had fallen, how many of them had been destroyed by the empire's endless wars, how many innocent lives had been lost because of the hunger for conquest. He thought of the people of his home world and how they had been swept up in the empire's expansion, how their cultures had been crushed under the weight of its reach. But none of that had ever mattered to him before, not until now. now that he stood at the edge of everything he had known and understood. Ilara was still watching him, her gaze unwavering, as if she were waiting for him to make the only choice that could save him from the darkness that had overtaken his soul. She had given him the chance to step away from the path of destruction, but it was up to him to take that first step. For a long moment, the captain stood there, trapped in the weight of his own indecision. He could feel the power of Ilara's presence surrounding him, pressing down on him like the weight of an entire galaxy. But in that weight, he found something else, a clarity, something he had never felt before in his life, the crushing realization that there was no honor in serving a broken empire, no glory in continuing the cycle of violence that had torn the galaxy apart. With a shaky breath, the captain dropped to his knees, his body trembling as the decision became clear. He would not return to the empire. He had seen the truth of it, and he could no longer turn a blind eye to the suffering he had caused and witnessed in the name of conquest. "I will walk away," he said, his voice barely a whisper, but his words carried the weight of his resolve. "I will leave it all behind and seek a new path." Ilara nodded slowly, her eyes softening ever so slightly, as if she had known the answer all along and was only waiting for him to find it for himself. "You have made the right choice, Captain," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. "The path ahead will not be easy, but it is the only one that will lead you to redemption." With those final words, Ilara turned and began to walk away, her form dissolving into the ether, as if she were part of the very fabric of the universe itself, leaving the captain to face the future alone. But for the first time in his life, he did not feel the weight of the galaxy pressing down on him. He felt free to choose a new path, free to change the course of his destiny. And in that moment, he knew that the galaxy would never be the same again.